Today we're in the greenhouse to do what I think is a pretty neat experiment. It involves splitting cactus vertically to see what effect that has on pupping, but there's a second potential use for that as well. So this is going to be kind of a long-term experiment. Today we're going to set up the cuts and then they have to have time to heal, and we'll observe what they do over time. So this is what we're doing today. This was split quite a while ago, and the idea, hypothesis is like, if I do this, the cactus will see each of these ribs as, you could call it an apical point. It has to do with a concept in plant growth called apical dominance. So apical dominance means that the highest point on the cactus will tend to grow shoots. So we see that right here. In San Pedro, they're very apically dominant, so they're either going to throw pups at the top or pups all the way down at the base. As you can see, this plant is throwing both. So this threw 3 pups, right? Which is great. Sometimes you'll throw pups from every point, but it's certainly less common than just having 1, 2, or 3 pups. So the goal of this is to fool the cactus into thinking that each of these is an apical point, right? Each of these is the top of almost like its own little cactus. Ouch, there's a thorn there. As you can see here, this one sprouted so far 4, which I think is encouraging. It's not the result I wanted, but I'm not, giving up on these guys yet. This probably has a lot to do with nutrition, water, fertilization, like how much drive are you putting into the cactus. And I think it's very likely that can be used as a tool as well. So for instance, if this thing was really, really struggling, maybe it would have only thrown 1 pup or no pups by now. So let's say I plant a fruit tree and it's just a single, stick, and it's small, and it grows through the season under rough conditions. It's going to grow a short single stick. Now, if it has really, really good nutrition, like let's say that I put like fertilizer in the water, so it's like fertigation, it's called. So it's being fertigated constantly. That thing's going to grow up. Obviously, it's going to go taller, but it's also going to start throwing side shoots all over the place because it just has the resources to put into that, and it needs to put them somewhere. So it'll just keep pumping out side shoots. Now with cactus, there may be a little bit of danger there to increase susceptibility to physiological problems. So we just have to find out, what happens with that. Obviously, if you go way too far, you're going to get actual damage and it'll start to kill the plant, especially with nitrogen, but that'll just have to remain to be seen, So that was one goal with this. What happened is I split a couple more. This one here, which I left the tip on. And so a few days ago, this was like this tall and these tips were really skinny and they were curved in. And I was like, well, that's not really going to do what I wanted. This thing's falling over. I need to prop it up better. So I just cut those off. Okay, so here's another thing that I did, which I didn't make video on, but one day my friend and I took a bunch of cuts of like King Tubby and Verity, which is something I want to propagate a lot, and we just took the pieces of cactus, put them on the table, and cut them into like chips, kind of like this. And then the idea was that we just season those out, cure them off, and then plant each one for propagation. Like each one was maybe like this long with like 1 or 2 spine clusters, or areoles they're called. Those are the buds of the cactus. But they didn't do what I expected. Now the reason I did that is because I had a bunch of these that were like graft failures. So they, I tried to graft them, but then eventually like they detached, but they're still green. So I thought, well, I'm just going to save those and try to root them, and I actually successfully rooted one, which I killed later. That's just my fault. It was conditions, And I thought, well, yeah, so why not just make those chips, right? And then we can plant them. So what I found out is that those chips that we cut fresh just dried up and died. And I realized that the reason that the graft failures survived is that they weren't complete failures. Like a lot of them were attached a little bit on the sides. And what that does is that the plant's feeding the chip for a while, and it gives it time for most of the cut surfaces to heal and callus over. And once they do that, they're actually extremely durable. I mean, I left a pile of chips like that, like failed graft chips, in the shade on a table for like probably close to 3 months. I just planted them and they're still green, you know. Okay, so I had also split this king tubby. It was like maybe this tall or something, as an experiment. It's just like, oh, let's see what happens if I split this one and see if we can get more pups. And eventually I came along and I was like, well, I could cut those off now and use them as little chips to plant and root and grow new plants instead. And that sounded tempting, and I'm trying to get as many king tubby plants as I can, so I went ahead and chopped that off. I think that this has a great potential for, we could possibly even split like a really long cactus like that other one over there, and then take those long ribs and just cut each one into a chip and root each one of those, which is even faster way to propagate and get a ton of chips than, you know, the idea of getting each rib to sprout its own pup. So both of these techniques would be about cloning, like getting a bunch of plants quick, not big plants, just plants. In this case, you would have the option to grow these out. So let's say even at this point here or that one, I could cut these and root them. And then my hope is that, like, say I cut this one off, that this one then would think, oh no, I'm the top of the plant now, I need to grow another pup, and it would just throw another pup. So imagine if this was like 10 inches long and you just keep doing that. So both of these are basically about that, the idea of just doing numbers as quick as possible. So for instance, this is Hextasy, one of my seedlings, and I want a bunch of this, right? So this seems like a viable option to get a whole bunch. Either one of those things, and I think it's going to be like, they're pretty similar, but one of them, you know, is going to give you bigger pups quicker because the plant is still driving this growth, and the other one's going to be like more numbers quicker, but you're going to have to wait longer to actually get pups off of the chips and for them to root. They do seem, so far, my very, very limited experience, they do seem to root slowly. Let's go look at the chips that I have bedded in right now, and I'll show you what I mean. So here are those chips. This may be the only chip that we cut fresh that actually survived, and there were a whole bunch of them. So yeah, some of these are pretty sad and don't have a lot of juice left. But considering how long they've been just laying around in the shade, they look pretty good, and I think that they'll perk up. So one thing I noticed about these guys is that they do seem to take up water just through this callus tissue that's grown over here. And as long as there's water available, I probably should be watering this every day. It's actually pretty hot, even though it's like past mid-September here. So I, hope that these guys will plump up within, a month or so. It's a slow process, it seems like, but again, they hold on to water really well. So once they absorb the water, I don't see them like re-drying out very quickly. But I probably should be watering every day because, these are well calloused and well healed. We'll talk about that in a second. And I think they could take the constant moisture without rotting, and then they'll plump up quicker and be more likely to grow roots. When you cut a cactus, it loses moisture very, very quickly, actually, through the cut. But there's a mechanism in place where that heals up. And it's not just drying. There's something else going on. It's like, if you look at a really old cut cactus that's just been, say, chopped off for harvest, you'll see that it's not just dried out, but it'll actually, sometimes it'll sink in and collapse, and then it'll kind of fill back out. It's like growing a layer of tissue over the whole thing, like a callus kind of thing. We call it a callus. It's not equivalent to what is a callus in us, but it heals up like it's living tissue of some kind. The purpose of like splitting the cactus ahead of time before cutting chips like this would be to undergo that process so that the only part that's going to evaporate quickly and lose a lot of moisture is the end where you cut it off, and I think that's probably not going to be a problem. In fact, I have some chips I cut, which we're going to go look at now. So here are the chips. These are the King Tubby chips. As you can see, they're very plump, very good shape. So, there's a big difference between this one cut having to heal and not lose too much water, and having like all of this cut surface, that cut surface, and this cut surface at once losing water. even in the shade. So, you know, I don't see any doubt that these are going to survive, and most of them will probably root. This is a sunrise. Unfortunately, I kind of stupidly left these laying here on this table in the greenhouse for like a day or two because I forgot about them. You can see like some of them have a little bit of what looks like sun scald. But again, I think that these are going to survive, and of course we could plant these this way or this way, and I think in both cases these chips could be smaller. So that's the experiment today. We're just going to cut some cactus to set them up, and then we'll have to revisit. So with a six-sided cactus like this, it's symmetrical, and so you can, you know, split it easily. But in this case, it's going to be a little bit more tricky. I like go to the center and cut straight down and do it like cutting a pie. This isn't very tall, but I'm going to go ahead and cut this one anyway. This is a King Tubby. I'd rather be cutting a taller cactus. I'm going to leave this one and we'll see if it sprouts a bunch of pups or not. And you know, it's not like it has to be perfectly down the groove. That's just, you know, OCD crap. And I think you could get pretty fast at this. You could also possibly invent a tool that does this for you. That, you know, a five-bladed tool and a six-bladed tool and a seven-bladed tool, that should be enough. You know, I'm just talking if you're working under nursery conditions like, you know, mass propagation kind of stuff. It looks like we did that successfully, so we'll just see if that decides to pop out. It almost looks like there's a pup trying to come out right there already. So this is something I think I want more of. It's called Scope Clone A. And this came from Trevor Elliott at Cactus Jones. I've gotten a lot of good stuff from him. We talked about my breeding goals and what I was looking for and all that stuff. He thought this might fit the bill. I'm going to go pretty far down here, like almost to the base. And again, at some point I'll decide like some of these I'm going to chip and some of them I'm going to leave to sprout pups. I haven't had any problems with like infection. Everything seems to be going well with this experiment so far, the little I've done. So I feel pretty confident in just like going for it and finding out what happens. With this one and ones that have like a tip like this, what I'm probably going to end up doing is coming back and taking like a chip to root and then leaving the rest. Because these tips are kind of wonky and small, and I just feel like this isn't the best way to do this. Like maybe just cut it back to, you know, a little bit and let each one of those grow a pup. So it may be, yeah, some of both approaches might be the way to go in a lot of cases. So this will just heal up and dry. Now, you could stick in like a marble or something here to hold that open. I haven't done that so far. One time I tried to put in some like little matchstick things or something. It'd be really easy to come up with something, right? Like a bean, like you slide a bean, a dry bean, like between each one or something like that. I just don't think it's going to be necessary because as they start to dry, they kind of like open up a little bit and let air in there and everything. Okay, I'm having a hard time figuring out which cactus to cut because there's very few things that I want to propagate a lot, and a lot of the ones that I do, I've already cut a bunch of material out, so there's not much left, or I'm trying to get them to flowering size as quick as possible, so I don't want to like, you know, stall. Say like here we have like these three nice heads here on Hextasy, and I want those to grow. I want to leave those three there. But I have a Jules Giant here. Hey, everybody likes Jules Giant. Why not propagate some more of it? It's a great plant. And so now this one has 6 ribs, so we're going to go for it on this and go down a ways and see if over time, if I can do that thing of just like sprout a pup, cut it off, let it sprout another one, just see how that maybe goes. Again, I'm trying to be symmetrical about this, but it's not like it really matters that much if it's straight perfectly down the groove or not. Again, I'm not going to do anything. These are kind of, you know, they're already a little bit apart and they should grow more apart. And I just want to see what happens. Like if I encounter problems at some point, I'll fix it. But it's been really hot and it's supposed to be sunny for like the next, I think, 10 days forecast. This is something I'm semi-interested in breeding with, possibly, but it's really just because it's pretty. Yeah, I'm more interested in just propagating this to have more plants because people should have it. It's Hutchinson 6212. Really beautiful plant. A lot of people that come into the greenhouse comment on it. And again, I'm going to go pretty long with this just to see what, I want to know what happens. And you can't outthink everything. Sometimes you just need to start the experiment and find out what kind of data you can get, and then you can worry about whether it has practical applications later. We just don't always have all the data, so empirical, find out what happens, take the observations, then start working out from that some more. Okay, so by way of example, let's look at this. So, I caught this one already, and we made a bunch of graft chips, and I'm rooting the tip. But let's say I want like a whole bunch of this because it's freaking amazing. What are my options? Okay, so one is to wait for it to pop. With this Terschackia, I have a feeling that's going to be a very, very long time. So that's not a great option. The only advantage is that it allows you to keep letting the cactus grow. You don't have to cut it, which is nice. I could take off like one rib and use that for grafting chips and let the tip grow so it'll be scarred, but at least your plant keeps growing. I could, we already talked about grafting, or this would be the other two options, is like split these down, all of them down, and this is 7 ribs, so that's a lot, and hope that each one throws a pup and then take that off and let it throw another pup and take that off, etc. Or do that and then create those chips and root the chips. So, grafting may seem like the obvious solution because it is fast, right? So you have, instead of this little chip, we take off here having to grow a root and then grow a pup and then grow into a cactus, we get the benefit of having a plant that's already established. Like say if I graft onto this, it's got roots behind it, it's got a lot of energy, and you can grow a big old pup in 1 year. But of course, if you're looking at really large numbers, you have to house all of those plants that you're grafting to, and you have to have all that stock, right? That's a lot of stock. Just let's say I cut this down to like here, and again, I'm kind of thinking in terms of like larger scale production. I'm going to have a bunch of pots that are, at least like in this size range to with plants, well, like these here to graft to, and a lot of these will be grafted to. That takes a lot of space versus like a bunch of little 4-inch pots or a bunch of trays where they're just packed in there until they root and start pupping, and then they can be teased out and potted up. This is just another tool. Like, put more tools in the toolbox, learn to use them, how well they work, what they work for, and then we can use them if we want or not if they seem irrelevant. One is better than the other in some ways, but not necessarily in all ways. Oh, by the way, here's like a little chip-like piece that was going to be grafted at one point, but that I decided to plant, and it's actually rooted now. So it's been like 2 or 3 weeks since I made those cuts, and I just wanted to do a little follow-up and a little bit of follow-up work. These pups have already grown quite a bit, and I'm going to go ahead and cut at least the 2 biggest ones off. I mean, I'm tempted to let them grow a little more. It's just I want to see what happens with these things continuing to pup out. If they even start to pup out like this fall, yeah, why not? Again, remember that I'm after numbers here. Like, I'm trying to get the most copies of this, the most clones of this cactus. And there's going to be a balance between like when these are cut and how fast they grow and how soon you get more pups, all of that stuff. I could make an argument for letting these grow since it's fall anyway, and they could probably put on like another inch before I cut them, and they probably won't pup out right away. So I basically just talked myself out of cutting those pups off. Because that does make more sense now that I think about it, just because of these particular circumstances. But experimentally, what I want to know is how quick they pup out. Once I cut them off, are they going to pup out again, and how quick are they going to pup out, and stuff like that. But given the time of year, yeah, that doesn't really make sense, so we're not going to do that today. I wanted to look at these, so you can see that this is well healed. There's a little bit of like dark stuff in there, maybe a little bit of mold or something, but there's no rot or anything like that. Obviously, if one wanted to, you could kind of spread these apart and spray in a little sulfur or cinnamon. People keep telling me to use cinnamon. I haven't tried it yet, but that's on the list. But so far, it hasn't been necessary. And, at this point, I'm just more interested in finding out if I need to do that or not, right? I probably don't need to do it most of the time, depending on time of year. So it just started raining, and if it rains for a few days or a week, then, you know, fresh cuts can be a problem. So here's a scope clone A. You can see everything looks good. One thing I probably will do today actually is go ahead and take these tips off and put those aside to root. You know, I won't root them until they're healed for another 3 or 4 weeks. My typical wait time to root a cutting is about a month or more. Sometimes I'll do it at like 3 weeks, but typically I tell people like a month or more, like a month or whatever you get around to it after that. I think one of them, like let's say this Jules Giant or one of these, maybe the Scope Clone A, I'll just leave it and see what it does and how it pops and where it pops and stuff like that. But let's on this Hutchinson 6212 and this Jules Giant, we'll go ahead and cut those tips off. Got my cacao here. This is just straight cacao beans, lightly roasted and ground up. Everything that's in the bean and the natural proportions of fats to solids, unlike, you know, processed cocoa powder, which has had the fat removed and is treated with alkali, and it's different. I love that stuff. I drink it every morning. I drink it now instead of coffee. It's way less jittery. And we also split this one, and it looks like that might already be swelling up there. Okay, so Hutch 6212, I think I'll take it down about a couple of inches here. 2 or 3 weeks here is enough time for it to heal enough that it's not going to dehydrate excessively. I must have hit an aerial there. I need to sharpen my knife. That's just dull. I'm actually really good at sharpening things. I've taught it and written about it, but I don't like doing it. To me, it's a means to an end. You know, I want a sharp tool to do whatever I'm going to do, but I don't enjoy it at all. Should have taken a little more there. Okay, so another thing to talk about is how big to take these chips, because it may be possible in the future to take really small chips and get really large numbers. But there is an interplay between, you know, green surface is important. So in a cactus, the green surface is like the leaf, right? It's what photosynthesizes, what collects energy. So if you cut something down, like say I took this cactus here and I cut it down to where there really was no green showing at all, it has to rely on just the energy in the roots. Like, what does it have stored below the surface to pop out and start growing? So if I cut it, say, 1 inch tall and it pops out and starts growing, it's not going to grow. Those pups aren't going to grow as fast as if I cut it up here, because it has all this solar panel here to drive the growth and collect more energy. What I'm saying is there's going to be some kind of balance there. You know, I don't know what that is yet. In a way, it's not going to matter, because if it has even a little bit of green, it's probably going to make it, but we probably want, you know, a reasonable amount. And to me, this looks like a lot. So let's say, like, as a system, I wanted to pursue rooting chips as opposed to, you know, letting these ribs pop out. So I could take, like, something like this Jules Giant. I could split it all the way down, let it heal for like a month. Think about how many chips that is. Okay, so then I get big trays of soil, and I could pack these things in almost touching and just pack the whole flat, right? Extremely efficient. And I don't even need to do anything with those until they actually have roots, and they could even have a lot of roots, and the pups could get pretty big. And then I could like dump all that out, tease it all apart, and pot those up. I'm thinking like nursery production work, kind of. And that kind of efficiency can be really important. Yes, you're going to have to eventually take those out and pot them up into something else. But in the meantime, they're taking up way less space. And it's really not that much work to like dump those out, tease them apart, and plant each one, versus like just putting them in 4-inch pots in the first place. You know, you create a little bit of extra work, but all these things, it's just about balance. Like, is it going to, in the long run, benefit you in some way? Because, you know, those trays, you could pack possibly, you know, 1,000 potential plants in a very small space on like a big table or something. Okay, so labeling, always important. Jules. But, you know, during the active growing season, things can pop out really fast. Like, it wasn't that long ago that I cut all of the pups off of this to root separately. They were just little guys, but already it's popped out 2 here, and that one looks like it's going to pop 2, so it's going to have 3 more pups at least very soon. Again, you can see here that I left very little green, like, so this cactus is not collecting a lot of new energy, but clearly it has plenty to keep pupping out. I was just using this as a production machine to get pups. Okay, so since it's raining, I am going to sulfur these because it's just damp out, and I don't know what the weather's supposed to do. I haven't looked. And that goes for these two. Same thing. Even sitting indoors, I'm not very climate controlled, so I'll just be on the safe side here. The reason I'm using wet sulfur, I actually find that it works really good. I don't have to breathe it, and this sulfur got crusty, so it wasn't powder anymore. And actually, this works really good. I mean, yeah, it introduces some moisture, but this should be all right, and certainly okay in the summer. I'm pretty sure this is going to get propagated. It says question mark. If I had to guess, I would say it's probably Jessica X Mallow 4. Very symmetrical. Look at these beautiful symmetrical pups. I mean, those are gorgeous. And those two are both 6-sided. This is 7-sided, which I tend to shy away from, but you just don't know what they're going to do. Like, sometimes they start out 5-sided as a seedling and then go to 6 or 7, or start out as 7 and go to, you know, an average of 6. This cactus is just so beautifully symmetrical and blocky. Look at these beautiful flat sides going down there, that I just had to save it out, and I put it in a bigger pot to see what it would do, and these pups look fantastic. So this is probably going to get propagated and named. It needs, of course, further testing to find out what's up with it. Is it a hero or a 0? And we'll leave this scope clone A and just see where the pups come out, and, you know, if there's any reason to cut those little claw tips off. Here's a pretty cool variegated, this is Baker X SSO2 or vice versa. Yeah, Baker X SSO2. Pretty neat. I'll certainly be propagating that and eventually offering some cuttings. You know, I have a lot of variegated cactus that I've saved. This is one of the most variegated and my favorite. I have one that's extremely variegated and even has grown like a long section of just straight yellow. I'm not that into that one, but it's the most variegated. But a lot of them will tend to they'll show a little bit for a while, like right there, or like this one right here. But they don't really amount to much, and it's just like a light variegation. I think this is another one. Yeah, this one may not even be variegated. That might just be like something more like sunburn. They're not really my thing, although I really do like this one. It's a really skinny bridge, though, which I don't care too much for skinny bridges, but it's neat. What else is interesting? Oh, Terschekii cross, probably Terschekii X scope again. It's growing already, these little fuzzy things, and they look to me more like what we think of as flower buds, rather than this just sort of like bursting out emerging pup. So I don't know what's up with that, but most of these are doing that, you know, or at least a lot of them. Yeah, man, if this thing flowered, I would be like, that's even more exciting than it pupping. But they're probably just pups, and I'm just not familiar with Terschekii and how they pop out. But hopefully you can see that little fuzzy thing. Again, it looks more like a flower bud thing that I'm familiar with. Check back in on this project later. I don't know how much later, just when there's something to talk about. See how those chips root, how fast they grow, how many ribs on each of these pop out on the average. Is it really going to be any more than, you know, just cutting them off and letting them pop? See you whenever that happens.